Hello, hello, and welcome to this My Edspace series on the UCAT exam. This is the introduction to your verbal reasoning section. I'm Eleanor. I'm one of the teachers at My Edspace, specifically an English teacher. So I will be talking you through the verbal reasoning portion of the exam because it contains quite a few English and critical thinking related skills in it. It's also passage based. A little about me. I'm one of the teachers at My Edspace. I did English and Spanish at university and have been teaching for 7 years. Now, the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT is the first section of the UCAT exam. So if you know about the UCAT exam at all, you'll know that it's computer based, that you are taking it within a certain amount of time, and that there are different sections testing different skills that you need to show your skills and your capacities for studying medicine. The verbal reasoning section specifically aims to assess your critical thinking skills, your ability to absorb and process information quickly, which is absolutely necessary. In medicine, especially as a doctor, you need to take in quite a lot of information and process it and make time-conscious decisions. You need to be able to isolate key factors amongst information in a passage, and you need to be able to make conclusions logically based on that information. You also need to decide how to modify your practice or thinking based on the information given. So putting aside your own personal opinions, what decisions should be made based on the information at hand in this specific situation. The setup of the verbal reasoning section is 11 question sets of 4 questions each based on a 250 to 400 word passage. So there are 44 questions in total in the verbal reasoning section. The questions are based on the contents of the passage or the conclusions and inferences that can be drawn from it without outside information. So it is a part of the exam where it's not what you know outside of the exam centre that matters, but rather what you can do with the information you're given under very controlled conditions within the exam itself. So nominally, you don't have to do any preparation. There's no specific things you need to know. You just need to know the skills of how to take this exam and what it expects and is asking of you in order to do well on it. The setup is the same for every question, with the passage on the left-hand side of the screen and the questions on the right. The passage will stay for the 4 questions, so you have them for each of the questions that pertain to it. You don't need to do anything without the information in front of you. There are 11 question sets, as I said, 44 questions in total, and 22 minutes for all of these questions and the entire verbal reasoning section. So if you work that out, that is 28.6 seconds a question, which is not very much. There are 2 types of questions, true, false, or can't tell, which is usually 2 to 4 of the question sets. So 8 to 16 of the questions on the exam, and free text questions, which are usually 7 to 8 question sets. So these are the more common questions you'll be getting, but both are important that we cover. As you can probably tell from how much you are doing in this section, time is one of the major factors and major parts at play here in the verbal reasoning section, because there is so little time to complete the questions and to process all of the information. This is done on purpose to show how you think in timed conditions and what you can do within the confines of a very rigorous and controlled environment. Of course, you will be able to do much better on this exam if you had unlimited time, but time is part of what is being tested. What are they asking you to do or prove? They are asking you to answer the questions or evaluate the statements based on the information from the passages, to divine or work out the key information and avoid distractors that are intentionally put in. All of these questions and passages are written by examiners and not by a computer, so they are intentionally crafted with key information hidden within them, as well as distractors designed to throw you off the correct information. The same logic and the same sort of route of attack and processing applies to both types of questions, the true, false, can't tell, and the free text questions, but we will look at the different subsections within that so that you know exactly what you need to before the exam so you can do your best. So this is what a question looks like on the exam. There's a passage here you can see, and there is a question. For this example, this is a true or false question, or true, false, can't tell. And then the other type of question is a free text question. So again, exact same, they're having the passage here on the left-hand side of your screen, and the question itself on the right. In the free text, you can see there is a question or sometimes part of a statement, and you are meant to decide which of the 4 options, and it's always 4 options, is the correct answer. The first type of question is, as I said, true, false, or can't tell, usually between 2 and 4 question sets. This is completely dependent on the year and on the exam itself, so that it doesn't become too formulaic and expected year by year. It's important to know how to do true or false questions, true or false can't tell questions, but they keep the number of them unclear year to year or different year to year so that you don't quite know what to expect. For each of these, there is 1 correct answer, and there are the 3 options, and they are always in the same order: true as A, B as false, and C is can't tell. So you don't need to waste time in the exam, in that precious 28.6 seconds that you have to answer each of these questions, reading the answers. You need to be really intentional about the time you are taking to look at the question and spend your time reading the question and skimming the passage to find the right answer, rather than spending your time reading true, false, can't tell, or expecting them to be in a different order. It's also important that you think about what the definitions of each choice mean in this context of the UCAT verbal reasoning exam, because they're not the same definitions as you and I might know from the real world. So what's true, what's false, and what you can't tell is very much defined by the examiners, and you need to know what each one means in order to make the right decision for each question. So true means that based on the information in the passage, you can logically conclude that this statement is true, or that the statement is confirmed. So notice, confirmed. It has to be absolutely clear that the information in the passage is indicating clearly that this statement is true. For false, this is based on the information in the passage. You can logically conclude that this statement is false. So not that you can't tell, and not that it could be or couldn't be. It has to be obvious that this is wrong or false, and that the information is contradicted by the information in the passage. So there will have to be some indicator that not only is this not true, as in not confirmed by the passage, but that it is actively contradicted by the passage. So the opposite is true, or something completely different is shown to be true. The third option, the can't tell option, is a little bit of a trickier choice, because based on the information in the passage, you cannot logically and without a doubt make or disprove this statement. So you don't have enough evidence to show that it is true, and you don't have enough evidence to show that it is false, based only on the information in the passage. No outside expectation or outside knowledge is required in this exam. In fact, outside knowledge is often a distractor. The examiners will choose a passage about something that you might know a lot about in order to steer you away from what the actual evidence is in the passage. So I've seen an example in which the question was asking about the sound barrier being broken in a flight, and the passage itself only offered the number of the speed of the aircraft, and it did not confirm in the passage that the aircraft broke the speed of light barrier or broke the sound barrier, and so that statement was proved to be you can't tell. Even if you personally, outside of this exam, know that the sound barrier is a certain measurement, you cannot state it only with the information in the passage that it is true or false. So you have to go with, based on the passage, you can't tell. There are some particular pitfalls for this option that we will look into later, so that you can see exactly what it looks like when questions are marked as can't tell. As I've explained briefly already, the other type of questions is the free text questions, usually between 7 and 9 question sets. They take longer than the true, false and can't tell questions, because you have to read not only the question but also each option and work through the process of elimination to find the correct answer. And differently to the true, false or can't tell as well, there are always 4 answer choices, or there is an incomplete statement, and there are 4 options as to how to choose the correct ending for the statement. So there is quite a lot more reading and quite a few more key words that you might need time to digest for the free text questions. So something to be mindful as well about as you consider timing in this exam. Now, with timing, we need to think about how we can be most effective and efficient with our time in this exam. So the advice given is that you don't take time to read the whole passage before answering the questions. You already have less than 30 seconds a question. You have 11 passages you will have to read in the 22 minutes you have for this exam. So, myself as a professional English teacher, I'm a quick reader, and I have timed myself reading some of these passages, up to 400 word passages, and it will take me about a minute per passage to just read it for the first time. Never mind looking at the questions or working out any of the answers. If you do the maths on that, you will have spent half of your time allotted in this section just to reading, and you will have very much less time to answer the questions. So what is advised, rather than reading the entire passage, is that you read the statements and the questions beforehand, so that you know what they are guiding you towards in the passage, and that any key words or information that you notice in the questions will stick out to you more as you skim the passage. You'll be more easily noticing relevant information, and that will save you time. You will also want to read around the key words in a passage. So once you have read the questions and you've noticed the key words in them, you'll scan or skim the passage looking for those key words. There will be sentences within the passage with those key words in them, so that you can look for the right information to answer the question. But the official guidance is also to read around the keywords in the passage. So not just the one sentence with that keyword in it, but the sentence before and the sentence after that sentence, because there may be information that mitigates, contradicts, or otherwise complicates the information in that sentence with the keywords. Because the examiners and the exam setters know that people are skimming these passages due to a lack of time, they will put distracting information in that sentence, or information that is key couched around the sentence containing those keywords, in order to ensure that the exam takers are reading with the tools that are necessary to do well on this exam. You'll also want to keep an eye out for synonyms, so words with similar meaning to your keywords. They may not use the exact same word, so they may not say that an event began on the 30th of April 1916, but they may say the commencement of that event was on in April 2016. 1916, I said earlier. So you'll want to be mindful of the fact that begins and commencement are synonyms, and that they thus would be guiding you to the same piece of information there, even if the exact word isn't used in the question and in the passage at the same time. You'll also want to be keeping an eye out for bridging phrases. So as you can imagine, a bridge, a phrase that connects two sentences so that their content within them becomes connected or causal, so cause and effect in other words. Those can be words like however, or as a result, or consequently, that suggests that the information in one sentence has a clear effect in the second sentence. Oftentimes, examiners will also neglect to put in a bridging phrase to test to see if you are keeping in mind and critically looking at each sentence and thinking, is there a definite relationship between these two sentences, or are they just next to each other? And a bridging phrase is a very good way to ensure and be aware of the relationship between sentences. Another thing you want to be keeping an eye out for is a distractor. So information that is intentionally placed to distract your attention from the correct answer or true meaning of a phrase. So occasionally there will be a keyword in the first paragraph and it will say originally or initially, whereas the question will actually be looking for an answer about the long-term effect or the permanent effect or the consequences of that keyword. And so later in the passage, it may come back to that keyword and tell you about those long-term consequences, but you may be thrown off by that initially or originally at the beginning. It's put there so that you see the keyword and act immediately, and it is only the people who are going to be successful on this exam who continue to skim the rest of the passage to ensure that the distractor is or is not indeed a distractor, that the keyword and the meaning they're gleaning from the passage is the correct answer that they are looking for. And another reading rule or strategy is to sometimes keep in mind it's helpful to keep two keywords at play in a question. For example, keeping a date if a specific date is asked about several times in the passage, or a specific capitalized word or topic is repeated quite frequently across the passage. It's helpful to look to choose another keyword from the question itself to use, so that when you're looking in the passage, you're not just looking for the Ferris wheel, if that's the topic of the passage, but also the Ferris wheel's stairs or the Ferris wheel's structure. You'd be looking for that part of the passage, and using those two words in tandem will guide you more quickly and efficiently to the correct part of the passage for your answer. Also, another tactic to consider is that if you can't find the information you would need to prove true or false confidently in 30 seconds, it is likely that the answer is can't tell. Again, part of the trick and the adversity you have in this exam is the timing. So you would need to also be tactical of when to move on from a question if you're unsure of the answer. There is no negative marking in this exam section, so you are not penalized for any incorrect answers. However, you are not given any points for unmarked questions. So when in doubt, or if you're running out of time, you always want to choose an answer based on your best guess, because there is a chance, and a 1 in 4 chance, or in terms of the true, false, or can't tell, a 1 in 3 chance that you could end up on the right answer. And if you use the process of elimination to narrow that down to 2 or 3 options rather than 3 or 4, then your probability of getting the correct answer increases, and your possibility and probability of getting more points on this section is also more likely. So I've mentioned a little bit about keywords. A keyword is a word whose usage is integral, so essential, important, crucial for the answer you are looking for in a question. So there will be some words that stand out as good keywords, like dates, because the numbers of them themselves stand out visually to a reader as they look over a passage. Capital letters also stand out, so names or locations. Numbers, not just dates, but also occasionally numbers of millions of participants or numbers of years in business do stand out to you again because they're written numerically rather than words on a page. The distinctive words or phrases we've mentioned a little bit, words that appear possibly once or twice or are really, really specific to a certain answer or a certain question you are looking for. And ideally they're featured only once or twice across the text. And if they are featured way more than that, but it is the subject of the passage or important to getting to the correct answer, then being paired with a secondary keyword will also be helpful. These keywords should ask you about a specific detail, that you have a keyword that stands out in the text, either because it's an unusual word or because it's used infrequently. Other times they're germane to the text, so used throughout. This will cost you time in searching for the right information. If the entire passage is about the Ferris wheel, for example, in my earlier example, then that might not be a good keyword for you to use for looking at something like the rivets of the Eiffel Tower itself. You would want to look for the word rivet, because even if it's not a capital letter or a location, it is a word that is only used maybe once in this passage about the Eiffel Tower and its conception and construction. And as I said again, sometimes it's helpful to choose to like rivet or Ferris wheel and rivet if we're talking about construction of major landmarks, for example. So some tips and tricks. These are common pitfalls for the verbal reasoning section. So both types of questions. And then in other videos, we're going to look at the different types of questions. So true, false, can't tell, and then 3 different types of questions that tend to appear on the free text question sets. For now, this is broad strokes across the verbal reasoning section. These tips and tricks will be helpful for you. So for example, the process of elimination. If you have 3 or 4 questions, 3 or 4 answers that you need to decide between, it's helpful if you can cross at least one of them off that you know is wrong. Because then it reduces the options you have to choose between. You want to scan for keywords across the entire text or passage. You want to know the definitions of true, false, and can't tell in this context. So not real world true, false, can't tell, but rather what you can logically prove from the passage. Looking for clue words. In addition to keywords, you want to look at definitive words. So words like always, never, solely, exclusively, must, impossible, can't, cannot, certainly, immediately, only, because those words are very restricted words, right? They suggest that there is a correct answer here, and this closes off possibilities. So if one of your options is that for example, the study of anthropology was always viewed as essential to Greek life, then you will have an opportunity to think, well, is there any piece of information in this passage that actually suggests that this isn't true? Similarly, mitigating words do the opposite, right? They open up multiple possibilities for you across the text. So it is possible, for example, it is frequently, often, rarely, likely, can, could, might, would, sometimes, usually, perhaps. So for example, this is adding much more doubt into your answers. And so if it is asking what might happen, it's opening up the possibilities for you. You want to be mindful as the definitive words and the mitigating words both speak to a and guide you towards a specific kind of answer. We're going to look at this more going forward as well. You also want to be looking in mind for mitigation and contradiction. So you can't take those keywords in isolation. When I said you need to not just look at the one instance, the first instance of a keyword that you see, but rather scan the text and make sure that keyword doesn't reappear later, because the information, the keyword around the keyword may change over the course of the passage. So if you only take the one example of the keyword in the passage when there are 3 uses of that keyword and take that one piece of information in isolation, you may be missing out on an important change or mitigation to that information, and it will change the answer you're looking for. And again, often this is done on purpose to ensure that you're looking across the entire passage. So there's an example there for you of what that looks like. For example, the question could be, the majority of Jacobeans did not accept the legitimacy of King James I's claim to the throne. The first paragraph, it may say, Elizabeth I's decision to make James I her sole heir drew criticism from her subjects. Okay, so that suggests that this question would go towards true. But if we kept scanning for James I in this passage about Queen Elizabeth I's passing on her reign, we might see in the 3rd paragraph that it says, however, as James I proved himself to be a strong and politically savvy leader, most Jacobeans came to accept his leadership. So we can see that that information fundamentally changes which answer we would choose, because initially we would say that yes, the Jacobeans, so true, the Jacobeans did not accept the legitimacy of his claims. However, if we see in the 3rd paragraph, it suggests that actually that information is false and that they did eventually accept the legitimacy of his claims to the throne. You also want to avoid relying on outside information. It is often there to distract you. Oftentimes the passages are made to be interesting and topical, so that you are distracted by not only how much you have to do in this section, but also by the contents of the passage, and you waste time reading the passage rather than going straight into the text and the questions themselves. Some more tips and tricks for you. So faulty logic. Correlation is not causation. So famous example is all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles are not squares. One side of that is true. All squares are rectangles because squares are a type of rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square. It's bigger umbrella versus littler umbrella. One fits neatly into the other, but the same cannot be said vice versa. Another way of saying this, if X means Y, then Y does not necessarily mean X, which is something people who are proficient studying maths might remember from proofs as well. You'll also want to be careful of the juxtaposition of information. Just because 2 sentences are next to each other does not mean that they are related in content. Keep an eye out for bridging phrases. They suggest that there is a relationship, either a link or a cause and effect relationship between the phrases. Sometimes you'll think that a question sounds like can't tell for the true false can't tells, but isn't, because you're looking for a specific word, keyword, or word around a keyword, like built or began, as we said in our previous example, but the word commenced is used. So are there synonyms? Another example here, unique versus innovator. Those are synonyms, but one may be only in the answer and one may only be in the passage. Similarly, even if it's not absolutely pointing word for word the passage to the question, can you logically make the conclusion that it's true based on the information you're presented, even if it's not in the exact same words, or vice versa? Can you prove that it is false? Same with numbers. So they may present you with dates and then suggest in one of the questions it may say that these 2 events took place a certain amount of years apart. So you may have to do quick calculations, usually adding or subtracting, or double checking an average of a few numbers to evaluate the accuracy of those statements. A note that for averages, there have been known to be tricks that if there is an average, it is a possibility that that is the average, not because there are several people below that average and several people above that average and some in the middle, and it averages out, but also that all of those objects, people's heights, etc., are exactly the same number, and thus they work out to the same average. So something to keep in mind as well. And I've given you a couple of bridging phrases here, as well as an example of correlation and causation explained here as well, and the definitions of juxtaposition and synonym for some people in case you don't remember those from your English class. That is all for now, but you will see me again in further videos explaining each type of question that you will see on the UCAT verbal reasoning questions and section. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to my EdSpace. See you in the next video.